Welcome to today's deep dive. If you are the kind of person who, gets fascinated by the hidden mechanics of history or like the secrets that families take to their graves, you are definitely in the right place.
Oh, absolutely. This is one of those stories that it completely upends everything you think you know.
Right, because today our mission is to unpack this totally mind-bending historical contrast. We're looking at a story of survival, secret identities, and a family literally split in two by the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah, and to really get into it, we have to start with an image that I'm sure you probably already have in your head.
Oh, totally. Like when we talk about historical icons, we really love the starving artist trope, don't we?
We do, yeah. We picture the suffering genius,
Yeah.
someone who sacrifices everything for their craft. The world just beats them down, and they turn all that pain into pure art.
Exactly. And nobody fits that trope better than Miguel de Cervantes.
Right, the author of Don Quixote.
Yeah, when you picture him, you think of this impoverished tax collector, a maimed war veteran, a former slave rotting in a North African prison, and a guy who spent his later years getting thrown into the Spanish debtors' cells.
Which is all true, by the way.
Hmm.
But we cling to that narrative because, well, it makes sense to us. It feels almost necessary.
Or like the suffering justifies the genius.
Exactly. There's this deep comfort in believing that the foundational masterpiece of Western literature actually required that specific crucible of crushing adversity to even exist.
Okay, let's unpack this because, and this is where it gets crazy. If you look just slightly to the left of Miguel on his own family tree, that neat little cinematic narrative completely shatters.
It really does. It falls apart.
Because while Miguel de Cervantes was literally starving and freezing in a Spanish prison, his own extended cousin, Don Iñigo López de Cervantes, was living a life of just, like, unimaginable wealth.
Unimaginable.
Yeah.
We're talking about a man ruling as a Caribbean governor, amassing massive estates, wielding ultimate judicial power in the New World, and just casually marrying his family into the legendary Ponce de Leon conquistador dynasty.
Which is wild. It's the ultimate early modern rich dad, poor dad scenario.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to look at it. You have two men sharing the exact same bloodline, living through the exact same historical era, but their lives go in such diametrically opposed directions that it feels like, well, like a bizarre social experiment.
So to figure out how Don Iñigo built this colonial empire while Miguel was systematically locked out of basically every avenue to success, we have to look at the starting point they shared, right?
Yes, and that starting point is a family tree hiding a very, very dangerous reality.
Okay, so before we talk about Caribbean palaces or Andalusian prisons, let's go back to this shared ancestral node.
Right, a couple named Ruy Avellanedas Cervantes and Constanza Maldonado de Diaz.
Ruy and Constanza. So they are the linchpin here.
Exactly. If you trace Don Iñigo's line back and you trace Miguel's line back, you hit Ruy and Constanza. And for centuries, the official state-sanctioned story was that the Cervantes family were old Christians.
Meaning what exactly in that context?
In the Spanish Empire, being an old Christian meant having pure, unblemished Catholic blood stretching back to time immemorial. No Jewish or Muslim ancestors.
Right, okay. But the modern historians, they found something else.
Oh, it's completely. Starting with the groundbreaking work of Americo Castro and then expanded by scholars like Daniel Eisenberg and Joseph Silverman, they have entirely dismantled that official narrative. The Cervantes family were actually conversos.
Conversos, also known as New Christians.
Yes, meaning they were Sephardic Jews whose ancestors had been forced to convert to Catholicism.
And to really grasp how huge that secret was, you have to, put yourself in the environment of 15th and 16th century Spain. It wasn't just about what you believed in private.
Not at all. It was a matter of state security and institutionalized paranoia. I mean, following the massive violent pogroms and forced conversions of 1391,
Right.
and then culminating in the Alhambra Decree of 1492, which gave the remaining Jewish population the choice to convert or be exiled entirely, the Spanish state became obsessed with this concept called limpieza de sangre.
Purity of blood.
Exactly. Purity of blood.
It sounds like an inescapable multi-generational background check. Like if your great-grandfather had the wrong religion or was forced into a baptism 100 years ago, you carry that invisible mark forever.
And that invisible mark dictated your entire existence. If the state determined you had converso blood, you were legally and socially tainted.
An iron ceiling.
Exactly. The purity laws acted as an iron ceiling. You were barred from attending elite universities, holding public office, entering specific religious orders, and, crucially for this story, traveling to the newly discovered Americas.
Wow. And then there's the Inquisition.
Right. The most terrifying part, you lived under the constant devastating eye of the Spanish Inquisition. Because their primary function wasn't actually to hunt practicing Jews.
Wait, really?
No, it was to hunt conversos, baptized Catholics, who were suspected of secretly maintaining Jewish practices.
So like a rumor from a jealous neighbor could ruin you.
A rumor, a stray comment, or even just a perceived behavioral quirk could result in you being investigated, tortured, and potentially burned at the stake.
Okay, so I have a question then. If the state is devoting immense resources and all this bureaucratic machinery to tracking these families down, how did a massive family like the Cervantes clan manage to hide it for so long?
Well, they tried to assimilate, but they actually left distinct sociological markers.
Like what?
The most glaring one is occupational patterning. If you look at Miguel's direct paternal line, a very specific picture emerges. His grandfather, Juan de Cervantes, was a licenciado, a trained jurist serving as a local magistrate.
Okay.
And his father, Rodrigo, was a cirujano de sangrías.
Which translates to an itinerant surgeon, right? But basically a bloodletter.
Yeah, practically speaking, he was a bloodletter who traveled relentlessly from town to town looking for work.
Now, in today's context, having a judge for a grandfather and a surgeon for a father sounds incredibly prestigious.
Right. It does sound great today.
But you're saying that in 16th century Spain, those specific jobs were basically neon signs pointing to a Jewish background.
Pretty much. In early modern Spain, old Christians of aristocratic standing actively looked down on administrative law, tax collection, and medicine.
They looked down on doctors.
Oh, yeah. Those are considered professions of commerce and intellect, fields that had been historically dominated by the Jewish community before the expulsions.
Wow, okay.
And the role of a cirujano de sangrías is especially telling. Rodrigo wasn't a prestigious university-trained doctor sitting in a royal court. He was a working-class tradesman performing minor surgeries, setting bones, and applying leeches. And more importantly, he was constantly on the move. That intense mobility, never putting down deep roots, always traveling between Córdoba, Seville, and Valladolid, that is a classic hallmark of a converso family trying to stay one step ahead of local inquisitorial scrutiny.
Always moving so they can't pin you down.
Exactly.
And the sources mention that it wasn't just the paternal side either. The mother's side of the family carries an even heavier paper trail. Specifically, Miguel's maternal grandmother, Leonor de Torreblanca.
Oh, the Torreblanca connection is where the historical evidence becomes absolutely concrete. Leonor was the daughter of Juan Luis de Torreblanca, a prominent physician in Córdoba.
Another doctor.
Right. And when historians dig into the tax ledgers and inquisitorial archives of Andalusia, the Torreblanca physician clan is heavily documented and explicitly associated with converso backgrounds. The Inquisition was very well aware of who these medical families were and where they came from.
Okay, I have to stop and push back on this a little bit because it feels like a contradiction.
How so?
Well, if the Spanish state is running this terrifying surveillance apparatus and everyone generally knows that the Torreblanca medical clan has a Jewish background, how did they survive at all? If you have a massive red flag for a last name, aren't you just waiting for the Inquisition to kick in your door?
You are. You were always waiting for the knock on the door. Survival for these families meant existing in a perpetual state of high-wire tension.
God, that sounds exhausting.
It was. They survived by making themselves indispensable to the local economy because people always need doctors and lawyers, and by loudly, publicly performing their Catholic orthodoxy.
Just putting on a show to stay alive.
Exactly. But you were absolutely right. It was a very fragile shield. The moment political winds shifted or a powerful enemy wanted your property, that known converso background would be weaponized against you.
Which brings us to how the other branch of the family decided to handle this terrifying reality. Don Iñigo's branch.
Right. Don Iñigo descended from Pedro de Cervantes y Maldonado and Isabel de Loaiza.
So they're carrying the exact same target on their backs.
The exact same genetic risk and the same nominal risk. I mean, linguist Patrick Hanks and various Sephardic genealogists have documented that the very surnames they carried, Lopez, Cervantes, Maldonado, were frequently adopted by Sephardic Jewish families during the forced conversions of 1391 and 1492.
Because when you were baptized, you didn't usually get to keep your Hebrew name, right?
Right, you adopted the surname of your Christian sponsor or the region you lived in or a geographic feature. So Iñigo's branch is in the exact same precarious boat as Miguel's.
So, with this dark cloud hanging over the entire family, how did Don Iñigo's branch not just survive and become astronomically wealthy and powerful? Like, how do you go from dodging the Inquisition to ruling the Caribbean?
They exploited a massive administrative loophole. They used the timing of the colonial bureaucracy to outrun the Inquisition.
A bureaucratic loophole in the 1500s. How does someone actually pull that off?
Well, it requires a combination of elite education, ruthless ambition, and geographic distance. Don Iñigo looked at the board and understood that staying in mainland Spain as a converso was a dead end. Your social ceiling was brutally low, and your risk of execution was incredibly high.
Right.
So he followed a very specific playbook. First, he secured a rigorous legal education, becoming a licenciado, a trained jurist, just like Miguel's grandfather.
Okay, so same starting career.
Yeah, but instead of settling for a minor magistrate role in some dusty Andalusian village, Iñigo looked across the Atlantic.
To the Americas, the Spanish crown had just claimed half the globe, and they needed to actually run it.
Exactly. Archival research, particularly the data compiled in this fascinating book called Forbidden Passages, details exactly how this frontier dynamic functioned. In the early to mid-1500s, the Spanish crown is frantically trying to organize massive, chaotic new territories in the Caribbean and South America.
They need infrastructure.
They desperately need lawyers. They need judges, accountants, and bureaucrats to enforce royal decrees, manage maritime trade, and collect the king's fifth.
Right.
And in this wild, disorganized frontier environment, the rigorous, suffocating limpieza de sangre oversight hadn't been fully formalized yet.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the Inquisition simply did not have the institutional bandwidth or the physical infrastructure in the Caribbean to strictly vet the great-grandparents of every single lawyer willing to sail across the ocean.
Wow. Okay, so it's the equivalent of, like, a savvy corporate lawyer joining a high-risk startup in a completely unregulated Wild West market, getting in on the ground floor just before the federal regulators show up with their clipboards.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. Iñigo made himself utterly indispensable to the crown's legal apparatus before the bureaucratic net could tighten.
That is so smart.
And because of his legal expertise, he secured a monumental appointment. He's named an Oidor, a judge of the Real Audiencia of Santo Domingo.
Okay, if you're picturing a local courthouse right now, you need to think much, much bigger. The Real Audiencia was the supreme appellate court for the Spanish Empire in the Americas at that time.
Right.
Being an oidor meant you were the physical embodiment of the king's justice in the New World.
The level of authority he possessed is just staggering, and he leveraged that judicial power brilliantly.
Yeah.
By the 1540s, he had amassed enormous tracts of land, controlled labor, and exercised executive and judicial authority across Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. He effectively served as a colonial governor.
So, looking at his trajectory, do you think Iñigo's drive to become a Caribbean governor was just, the standard pursuit of wealth and glory? Or was that legal degree and the governorship essentially a survival mechanism, like a highly elaborate, incredibly expensive shield against the Inquisition?
Well, when you view it through the lens of converso history, the survival mechanism is clearly the foundation. Acquiring immense wealth and executive power in a frontier colony provided an insulation that was biologically impossible to achieve in Spain.
Because he was just too powerful to touch.
Exactly. By becoming the supreme arbiter of the law in the Caribbean, Don Iñigo effectively outran his family's past. He traded the terrifying day-to-day reality of being a suspected new Christian in Andalusia for the ultimate executive authority of the West Indies.
Right.
When you are the governor, when you are the oidor, no local priest or minor official is going to dare question your bloodline. You literally represent the king.
He became the system so the system couldn't crush him.
He did. But Iñigo was a pragmatist. He knew that his personal political power would only last as long as he was alive to enforce it.
Makes sense.
He didn't just want a temporary shield for himself. He wanted to permanently erase the family's mancha, their stain, for all future generations.
And in the 16th century, there was really only one way to permanently rewrite your family's pedigree.
Marrying up.
Right. You marry into a family whose pedigree is so famous, so unassailable, that nobody would ever dare investigate you again. You buy permanent social armor.
Precisely. Don Iñigo first married Catalina de Guzmán y Carrillo Altamirano.
Just hearing those surnames tells you everything you need to know.
Right. That is established elite Spanish nobility. This marriage consolidated his status and entrenched his branch of the family in the upper echelons of colonial society. But the absolute masterstroke, the move that cemented the Cervantes dynasty in the Caribbean forever, was the strategic marriage of their daughter.
This is the part of the story where a clever bureaucratic maneuver turns into literal historical mythology.
It really does. Their daughter, Doña Isabel de Loaiza y Cervantes was married to Juan Ponce de Leon II.
The Ponce de Leon family, as in the conquistador who led the first European expedition to Florida.
The very same bloodline. Juan Ponce de Leon II was the grandson of the famous conquistador, and he himself served as the interim governor of Puerto Rico in 1579.
Think about the mechanics of this for a second. Iñigo takes a family that is secretly Jewish, constantly at risk of being tortured or burned by the Inquisition back in Spain, maneuvers them into a Caribbean governorship, and then marries his daughter to the grandson of the ultimate Spanish conquistador.
It's unbelievable.
It's like a nouveau riche family marrying into an ancient royal dynasty. But the stakes aren't just social climbing. The stakes are literal life and death.
It's the ultimate laundering of a family lineage. By merging the Cervantes Converso heritage with the Ponce de Leon dynasty, Don Iñigo's descendants acquire the ultimate proof of Spanish nobility. The Ponce de Leon name was unimpeachable.
Right. It was synonymous with the violent, victorious expansion of the Spanish Empire itself.
Exactly. Once that bloodline merged with Iñigo's, the Inquisition could no longer touch them.
The sources trace the incredible lineage that this union created, and it echoes down through history. Isabel and Juan Ponce de Leon II have a son, Luis Ponce de Leon y de Loaiza.
Yes.
He has a son, Juan Ponce de Leon y Loaiza, who goes on to literally found the city of Ponce, Puerto Rico.
And the lineage continues unbroken through the highest levels of society, down through Catalina Cario de Loaiza, Isabel Ponce de Leon Loaiza, all the way to Capitan Francisco Menendez. We are talking about generations of elite, foundational figures who shaped Caribbean history.
The irony is breathtaking. The descendants of forced converts, people whose ancestors were given the brutal choice to convert to Catholicism or be exiled from their homeland, ended up founding major Puerto Rican cities under the banner of the ultimate Spanish conquistador family. They didn't just escape the empire, they became the aristocracy of the empire.
It is a stunning, multi-generational victory of assimilation and strategy. Don Iñigo looked at the social architecture of Spain, saw that the game was permanently rigged against him, and moves his pieces to a completely new board where he could rewrite the rules.
Which brings us to the devastating flip side of this dynamic.
Yeah.
What happens when you don't have that legal degree? What happens when you're born a few decades too late, the colonial bureaucracy has finally caught up, and you can't just sail away to the new world to outrun your bloodline?
Then you face the reality of the poor dad. You live the life of Miguel de Cervantes.
And it's not like Miguel didn't try to go to the Americas. He obviously saw what his cousin's branch of the family had accomplished. He wanted out of Spain.
He tried desperately to get out. This is one of the most heartbreaking bureaucratic details in all of literary history. Academic researcher Ainit Talmon notes that Miguel de Cervantes formally applied for royal permission to emigrate to the American colonies on 2 separate occasions.
Wait, twice?
Yes, first in 1582 and again in 1590.
And he was rejected both times.
Outright denied. By the late 16th century, the chaotic frontier window that Don Iñigo had so deftly jumped through was firmly bolted shut.
The regulators arrive.
They sure did. The Council of the Indies, which governed the colonies from Seville, had tightened its grip. The Inquisition had established formal tribunals in Lima and Mexico City. Emigration now required strict, rigorous proof of limpieza de sangre going back at least 4 generations. You had to produce impeccable, notarized documentation that you had no Jewish or Moorish ancestry.
Which Miguel could never provide. The paper trail of his converso heritage was simply too thick. He had the magistrate grandfather, the traveling bloodletter father, and the grandmother from the highly suspicious Torre Blanca physician clan.
Right, there was no hiding it anymore.
The multi-generational background check finally worked exactly as the state designed it to.
He was systematically red-flagged. Miguel is caught by the very bureaucratic net that Iñigo slipped through decades earlier. Denied his visa to the New World, Miguel is physically trapped in the Mediterranean sphere. And that geographic trap defined the rest of his life as a continuous, brutal struggle for survival.
The psychological weight of this is staggering when you consider what Miguel had already sacrificed for Spain. I mean, in 1571, he fights in the Battle of Lepanto, a massive naval clash against the Ottoman Empire.
And he fights bravely.
He takes 3 musket shots, 2 to the chest, and 1 that permanently severs the nerves in his left hand. He is a literal war hero, maimed in service to the crown.
A maimed war hero who just a few years later, in 1575, is captured by Ottoman Barbary corsairs while sailing back to Spain. He's transported in chains to Algiers, where he spends 5 horrific years as a slave in the baños, the prison camps.
5 years.
5 years of hard labor, torture, and ransom negotiations.
While his cousin's descendants are living in sprawling palaces in Santo Domingo and Puerto Rico, acting as the voice of the king, Miguel is enslaved in Algiers, waiting for a king who will never come to save him.
And even his eventual release was a humiliating reminder of his marginalized status. He was not ransomed by the crown he had bled for at Lepanto.
Unbelievable.
He was finally bought out of slavery in 1580 by the Trinitarian Friars, a religious order dedicated to crowdsourcing funds to buy the freedom of Christian captives.
So imagine his reality. He returns to Spain in 1580. He's a crippled veteran. He's a severely traumatized former slave. Because of his ransom, his family is saddled with crushing debts.
Yep.
And because he lacks that unblemished purity of bliss certificate, he can't get a prestigious court post, he can't get a military pension that actually covers his living expenses, and he can't get a visa to the colonies. How does he survive?
He is forced to take one of the only administrative jobs available to someone of his background and low social standing. He becomes a government tax collector.
Oh.
Yeah, he spends years traveling the dusty roads of Andalusia, requisitioning wheat, oil, and taxes from hostile villagers to fund the Spanish Armada.
The brutal irony of that job, Miguel de Cervantes was literally going door to door, collecting taxes to fund the very empire that deemed his blood impure, the empire that let him rot in a North African slave camp, the empire that rejected his passport to a better life.
It was a deeply tragic, grueling existence. It didn't even pay well. It was fraught with peril. He constantly struggled to balance the complex accounts. He suffered bankruptcy because of minor discrepancies in his tax ledgers and occasionally requisitioning supplies from church property, which got him excommunicated, by the way. He was thrown into squalid debtors' prisons multiple times.
It's just nonstop misery.
He was a man completely boxed in, marginalized, and humiliated by his society at every single turn.
I have to ask, do you think Miguel knew? While he was sitting in a freezing Spanish debtor's prison trying to figure out how to pay off his ledgers, do you think he knew about his wealthy cousin's success across the ocean?
Given the nature of family networks in the early modern period, it is almost certain that he knew.
You think so?
Oh, definitely. Conversa families, in particular, relied heavily on tight communication networks for survival, trade, and information. It is highly probable that Miguel was acutely aware of the Loaiza and Ponce de Leon connections.
Wow.
You can only imagine the profound psychological toll that must take. To know that the exact same blood runs in your veins. But because of a shift in bureaucratic timing and a legal degree, one side of the family is ruling a Caribbean paradise, and you are literally rotting in a cage.
But this is where the story shifts from a tragedy into something transcendent.
It really is.
Because you can lock Miguel de Cervantes out of the New World. You can deny his visa, you can enslave his body, and you can throw him in a cell, but you cannot stop his mind. He couldn't build a physical colonial empire like Don Iñigo. So, trapped in poverty and social exclusion, he built a literary empire instead.
And he built it brilliantly.
Yeah.
Don Quixote is universally considered the first modern novel and a foundational masterpiece of Western literature.
Right.
For centuries, literary critics read it primarily as a brilliant, straightforward satire. A hilarious, slightly melancholic story about a crazy old man whose brain dried up from reading too many chivalric romances, deciding to fight windmills.
But based on the modern academic sources, we know it is so much more than a comedy. He filled this book with secret codes about his family's true identity. It's the ultimate act of literary revenge.
This is where the scholarship truly reshapes our understanding of the novel. Scholars like Abraham Haim, the former director of the International Sephardic Council, alongside Cervantist Leandro Rodriguez, have spent years meticulously documenting the hidden Talmudic and converso subtexts woven throughout Don Quixote.
Okay, lay it on me.
When you read the book through the lens of Miguel's rejected, marginalized converso reality, it transforms from a simple satire into a profound act of literary defiance.
Let's start with the most obvious element, the title itself. The identity of the main character, Don Quixote de la Mancha. Now, La Mancha is a real geographic region in central Spain. It's flat, dry, and notoriously unremarkable.
Right, very boring place.
On the surface, the joke is that this great knight comes from the most boring place on earth, but there's a linguistic double meaning hiding there, isn't there?
A massive, deeply subversive double meaning. In 16th century Castilian Spanish, the word mancha literally translated to stain or taint.
Oh, wow.
In the specific socio-political context of the Inquisition, it was the exact terminology used to describe the mancha de sangre, the blood stain of Jewish or Muslim ancestry.
He literally named his hero Don Quixote of the Stain.
Precisely. The entire obsession of the Spanish state was to ensure you had no mancha in your lineage. By naming his protagonist Don Quixote of the Stain, Cervantes is making a brutal satirical jab at the Spanish obsession with pure pedigrees. He centers his magnum opus on a man whose very origin screams, into your blood.
It's hiding right in plain sight. The very first thing the reader learns about the character is a pun about being secretly Jewish, and the codes just keep going. The sources point to Chapter 1, where Cervantes is describing Quixote's mundane everyday life, including his weekly diet. It explicitly states that on Saturdays, Quixote eats a dish called duelos y quebrantos, which translates to griefs and breakings.
And for centuries, culinary historians debated what exactly this dish was.
Yeah.
They usually concluded it was some sort of cheap scrap meat and eggs, a peasant dish.
Makes sense on the surface.
But when you apply the converso lens, historical analysis reveals something far more poignant and terrifying. The Sabbath Saturday was the most dangerous day of the week for a converso.
Because the Inquisition was literally watching the chimneys.
They were. Inquisitors and suspicious neighbors would watch to see if a family wasn't cooking on Saturday, which would indicate they had prepared food on Friday to observe the Jewish Sabbath rest.
That is so paranoid.
To survive, converso families were forced to cook on Saturdays and often forced to explicitly cook and eat pork or non-kosher foods just to publicly prove their Catholic orthodoxy.
So they were violating their own ancestral laws under the threat of death every single weekend.
Exactly. Eating on Saturday became a deeply traumatizing ritual. It was a day of mourning, a day of violating their faith under duress. It was literally a day of griefs and breakings of the spirit.
Wow.
By having Quixote eat duelos y quebrantos, specifically on a Saturday, Cervantes is signaling the secret, internalized trauma of the entire converso community to anyone who knew how to read the signs.
It's a literary Trojan horse. On the outside, it's this goofy, highly entertaining slapstick comedy for the Spanish masses. The old Christians are reading it laughing at the crazy guy falling off his horse.
Right, they have no idea.
But on the inside, it's a massive inside joke, a secret handshake, and a profound lament for a crushed community.
Cervantes was communicating directly with a hidden audience. He does this explicitly regarding language as well. In Chapter 9, there is a famous metafictional moment.
Right, I love this part.
The narrator, acting as Cervantes himself, is walking in the Alcana of Toledo. The Alcana was the old, historic Jewish commercial district. The narrator says he buys some old manuscripts from a silk merchant, and he remarks to the reader that they are written in a language older and better than Arabic.
If he's in Toledo's Jewish district, and it's a language older and better than Arabic, he means Hebrew.
Unequivocally. He is openly elevating Hebrew, the sacred language of his persecuted ancestors, in a book published in a country that had completely banned it and actively burned those who read it.
That takes guts.
It is an incredibly subversive line. But perhaps the most jaw-dropping piece of evidence, the one that cements Cervantes' intimate knowledge of his heritage, happens in Chapter 45, involving Sancho Panza.
Okay, I read the outline for this, but I am still trying to wrap my head around it. Walk us through Chapter 45, because this is where the codes go from subtle puns to actual religious texts.
Okay, so in Chapter 45, Sancho Panza has been made the governor of an island, which, by the way, is a hilarious parody of the exact kind of colonial governorships men like his cousin Don Iñigo held.
Ah, I didn't even put that together.
Right. So as governor, Sancho has to act as a judge and resolve local disputes. Two old men come before him. The first man claims he lent the second man 10 gold crowns, and the second man claims he already paid them back.
Classic dispute.
The second man, the one who supposedly paid the debt, is leaning heavily on a thick, hollow wooden cane. The man with the cane says, "I will swear a holy oath that I gave the money back."
Okay.
He asks the first man to hold his cane for a second so he can place his hand on the cross and swear. He solemnly swears he returned the money directly into the man's own hands. He then takes his cane back and walks away. It seems like a foolproof, airtight oath.
But Sancho figures it out.
Yes. Sancho Panza, in a moment of sudden, brilliant intuition, orders the old man's cane to be broken open.
And the 10 gold crowns pour out. The guy had hidden the money inside the hollow cane. So when he handed the cane to the first man to take the oath, he was technically telling the truth. He had physically placed the money back in the man's hands. It was just hidden inside the wood.
It's a remarkably clever story about the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. But, as Professor Abraham Hayne points out, Miguel de Cervantes did not invent this story.
He didn't.
No. This exact legal dispute, involving a hidden sum of money inside a hollow cane, handed over during a sworn oath to technically avoid perjury, is a direct, near-literal adaptation of a famous story found in the Talmud. Specifically, it is found in Tractate Nedarim, page 25a.
Wait, I have to stop you there. The Talmud is the central text of Rabbinic Judaism. The Spanish Inquisition had completely banned it.
They burned thousands of copies in public bonfires.
So how on earth does an impoverished tax collector, a man who couldn't even get a visa to Mexico, get his hands on a banned copy of the Talmud to put it in his novel? Was there an underground black market for Jewish books in Spain?
That is the crucial question. It is highly unlikely he possessed a physical printed copy of the Talmud. Possessing one meant almost certain death if discovered.
So how did he know the story?
This highlights the incredible resilience of oral traditions and secret converso networks. These stories, legal rulings, and cultural memories were passed down in whispers behind closed doors from grandfather to father to son.
That is beautiful, actually.
By putting a literal Talmudic ruling into the mouth of Sancho Panza, Cervantes is proving that the Inquisition failed. He is embedding the legal and cultural genius of Judaism right into the beating heart of Spanish popular culture.
But by doing this, by naming his character after the stain of impure blood, by referencing Saturday griefs, praising Hebrew, and literally adapting the Talmud, wasn't Cervantes risking his life all over again? If the Inquisition was watching chimneys to see if you cooked on Saturday, weren't they reading the biggest novel in the country and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is a Jewish folktale?
That is the genius of the Trojan horse. He wrapped these explosive secrets in so much irony, so much layered metafiction, and so much absurd slapstick comedy that he maintained total plausible deniability.
Plausible deniability.
Exactly. If an inquisitor questioned the hollow cane trick, Cervantes could just shrug and say, it's just an old folk tale I heard in the marketplace in Algiers.
Oh, because he was a captive there.
Right, and if they questioned the name La Mancha, he could say, it's just a funny, dusty province. He hid the truth in the open, relying entirely on the ignorance of the state censors and the shared secret knowledge of his true audience.
It is absolutely incredible. He proved that the state can strip a person of their wealth, they can deny their visa, they can enslave their body, and they can reject their social status. But they cannot erase their intellectual heritage.
No, they can't.
He took the very thing that ruined his life, his converso identity, and used it to achieve a kind of immortality that his wealthy, powerful cousin could never even dream of.
And that brings us full circle to the divergence of this remarkable bloodline. We have one shared ancestral node, Rui and Constanza, carrying this heavy, dangerous secret.
Right.
And from that exact same starting line, two vastly different destinies emerge, shaped entirely by how they navigated the bureaucratic machinery of the Spanish Empire.
On one hand, you have Don Iñigo López de Cervantes. He chose the path of assimilation and aggressive strategic maneuvering. He leveraged his legal education. He slipped through the bureaucratic cracks of the New World before the Inquisition could establish its tribunals. And he used the Ponce de Leon marriage to buy his family permanent social armor. He secured immense executive power, massive estates, and lasting wealth in the Caribbean.
And on the other hand, you have Miguel, facing the full, unmitigated brunt of poverty, slavery, and state rejection. He couldn't escape the bureaucratic net of the purity laws.
But instead of being utterly destroyed by it.
Exactly. Instead of being destroyed, he synthesized that hidden converso trauma, that lifetime of exclusion and observation, into a foundational pillar of global culture.
It really makes you rethink everything you know about the creation of art and the forces that shape history.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leaves us with a truly provocative thought. We spent this entire discussion marveling at how Miguel's life was a brutal tragedy compared to his cousin's glittering success. But imagine if the royal bureaucracy hadn't flagged Miguel's lineage. Imagine if the Council of the Indies had simply approved his visa to the Americas in 1582.
Wow.
He likely would have sailed away to the Caribbean. He would have used his brilliant intellect to become just another comfortable, wealthy, and perhaps entirely forgotten colonial bureaucrat, exactly like his cousin.
That is haunting.
It forces us to ask a terrifying question.
Yeah.
Was the greatest novel in Western history only made possible because its author was systematically denied every single other avenue of success? Did the Spanish Inquisition, in its ruthless effort to silence and marginalize his bloodline, accidentally force the creation of the very masterpiece that would immortalize it?
What an incredible thought to leave on. The idea that the X-ray machine of history, that brutal attempt to categorize and crush people based on a diagnostic stain, actually produced the ultimate literary triumph. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden lineages of history. The next time you see a statue of a starving artist or read a classic novel, remember the invisible forces that put the pen in their hand. Keep questioning the official stories and keep looking for the secrets hidden inside the masterpieces you think you know.